2, 1. Thank you. All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Morgan Denton. I'm an English Language Arts Specialist at Maine Department of Education. I'm sure you know that because I've been flooding you with messages, I'm sure. This is a special occasion for us. We are going to discuss grading, or the search for grading equity, with Patty Forster, who is a teacher at Camden Hills. If you've been with me for a while coming to these sessions, you know I shared with you an article a few weeks ago about clarity, teacher clarity. It's about focus, purpose, and letting go. And Lord knows during this time we have had to really do all of those things. Get clear, understand a very different purpose for our classrooms, and let go of lots of things that may have been quite heartbreaking to do so. So Patty is extending this learning. She's been looking at grading equity for a while and is going to share with us her journey. I want you all to hang on, because at the end of this session, I'm going to tell you about some next steps and an opportunity. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to you, Patty.
Can you hear me right now, Morgan?
Yes, I can. Okay,
because my computer is frozen and I'm trying to figure it out. Can you still hear me? Because now I can't hear you.
Yep, I can hear you.
Huh. I may have to do a quit and come back in, because I have zero control on my computer.
All right, you go ahead and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll dive into what I was going to do at the end.
Okay.
Please remember, at the end of this session, I will put a link in the chat box that provides me with feedback about the session and gives me some ideas for going forward. But at the end, when you say, yes, you did complete the session, you will get your contact hour for this event. So that's how you access that. You want to make sure to do that. The other thing I want to mention is that we are going to launch a text study based on the book that Patty will be talking about today. And so I'm going to put a link in for you to register for that text study. I'll add that into the chat box a little later on during this session. I've been working on trying to get some financing, so the first 50 people who sign up, who register for our text study, will be able to get a book free of charge. Everything is working slowly right now because I had asked to have it all done by now, but anyway, that's the next thing we're working on. So if you'd like to participate in the text study, you really want to just do that registration. There's no cost for registration. That's mostly about me getting the information I need to support your learning going forward. And the plan is we'll do the text study each Tuesday in June at 3 o'clock. That'll be our professional event at those time slots for the month of June. I also plan to connect this continuing conversation about grading and equity to the updated standards. So this is going to give me a vehicle to get into working some more with the updated ELA standards. So are there any questions while we wait for Patty to come back? I'll tell you one more thing then. Next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, I plan to host my final session in this series, you know, in the context that we've been working in. And it's going to be about planning for the next normal. People keep talking about the new normal. I think we're in it. This is the new normal, right? We need to plan for the next normal. Renee, that's what you were asking about. So I have some things to put in front of you to think about how we get ready for the next normal. And to me, it's really looking at the next school year. So that'll be next Tuesday. And I'll send you out the big email blast like I did for this one. Okay, I see that Patty has made her way back in.
Phew.
Yeah. Thank goodness, Patty's here. All right. So
sorry.
Patty, that's all right. Not a problem. You know, these technical issues. Right before this, I was on a book study with Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey. And Doug, as he always does with these book studies, he sent us off into breakout rooms and immediately kicked everybody out, shut the whole thing down. He did it twice in a row. We don't know what happened. So, you know, best laid plans. All right, so Patty, welcome once again.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to you, and you should be able to share your screen and your slides and all of that. Oh, and by the way, the slide deck that Patty's using is on the Padlet. I will grab the Padlet address for anyone who doesn't have that.
Okay, yeah, that's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a presentation, and I would highly recommend that you turn your video screens off because I'm not going to be able to see you. So just kind of getting started. So this is kind of a summary of my search for more equitable grading and the things that I've been thinking about in the learning. So I am not professing to be an expert at this at all. Let me get rid of that right there. But it's just things that I've been learning about. Some authentic agreements, engagement agreements we can make. I'm going to keep my presentation part, this part, down to about 20 to 25 minutes. So please mute and also turn your video off. I just can't recommend that enough. Just sit back. You don't have to hold your neck straight and get a stiff neck. So video's off during the presentation time. After that, we're going to have time to discuss, and I'm hoping that everyone will contribute to that. If during the presentation you do have a thought or a question or an epiphany, as Marissa Thompson calls them, TQEs, then feel free to throw those into the chat. Morgan's going to monitor that and see if there's any questions to pull or comments to pull out at the end. So for today's discussion, I kind of set it up to look at where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And with that, the guiding question that I always come back to with everything is what is best for kids. So where we've been, traditional grading started in the 19th century, early 20th century, public schools, we all know this. It was ranking and sorting kids. It was about obedience. It was about assimilation to try to create good American citizens. And kids were tracked into going into industry or vocational fields or the elite that got to go to college. At that time, grades did work. They were extrinsic motivators that worked for the kids of that time period to build the skills that they needed in the workplace, like following orders, being respectful, punctual, etc. Where we are today doesn't look much different in many places. We still are ranking and sorting kids with our grades and our different level classes. We still are trying to get kids to be obedient and good learners in class. We are assimilating them to be good citizens, whatever our perception of that may be. And they are being tracked, again, into vocational education or college. But the question that I have is, are extrinsic motivators still good for these 21st century workplace skills we're trying to prepare kids for? Because they are different than they were. They're different than they were in 2015. The World Economic Forum had predicted that in 2020, today, complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity would be the top skills. And don't we all know that now? Because those are the skills we're using in our workplaces. So looking at extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation a little bit, the impact of grades on learning, grades as that extrinsic motivator, is for some, it diminishes their interest. For others, it creates a preference to do the easiest possible task. Those kids that are like, what do I have to do on the rubric to get the grade that I want? And that limitation, in a way, reduces the quality of thinking. And that's kind of based on Alfie Kohn's research. Intrinsic motivation, I learned a lot from Daniel Pink and his books. And intrinsic, when it's something that is internal to me, I'm interested in it, and increases engagement. It creates a preference for challenging and enriching tasks and improves quality of thinking. And I think we're all aware of that. And so grades as an intrinsic motivator or something else to intrinsically motivate this current generation. And now we're stuck in the middle of this COVID-19 grading, and my administrators and people in the state said, do no harm with your grading. And I just want that to sink in a little bit. What does that mean about the way we were grading? If they're asking us to do no harm with grading now, what were we doing? something really important to think about. And so this idea where we are right now, it's sort of this place where we don't have to think about complex rubrics and points. It's just, how do we engage them? How do we get them to participate so that we can pass them or fail them, which a lot of schools have shifted to. And there's an article that I posted in the resource document by Sarah Zerwin about this shift to grading in COVID-19. And she's the author of this book that just came out in March from Heinemann called Pointless, an English Teacher's Guide to More Meaningful Grading. And the gist of it is to focus on feedback versus grades or points. So where are we going? I think it's really important, and if you can walk away with anything from me, we need to question our grades and grading practices. So for me and others, does the system of traditional grading create inequities with ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, and disabilities? With ethnicity, there's all kinds of research that there is a gap, and that gap keeps getting wider between white and Black Hispanic students, and what is contributing to that gap? For socioeconomic status, it has a substantial effect on student grades. These kids come in without the same resources as others, and that affects their grades the way we grade right now. For gender, for decades, the research has shown that girls have had higher grades and grade point averages than boys as a whole. And why is that happening? And finally, in disabilities, like 60 to 70%, the research shows of our kids with disabilities in general ed classes are scoring below average grades. So what are the problems with the traditional grading practices? These 4 reasons that I have here on the slide, which I'm going to get into a little bit more, come from this book, Grading for Equity. Morgan may have mentioned that earlier, or she'll mention it again. This book is really good in thinking about our current grading system and what we can do to make it more equitable for all. And these are the 4 concepts out of several more that I pulled out of this book. 1, the fact that grades vary from teacher to teacher. I'm sure that all of you see this at your own schools too. That is a problem, and that in itself is really inequitable to kids. Depending on which teacher they get affects their GPA. So looking at this table, and this table's out of Joe Feldman's book, there's 3 math teachers at the same school, and teacher 1, the column on the left, 70% of his kids have A's. Teacher 2, 14% can get A's. On the low end, 2% of teacher 2's kids get F's, and teacher 3, 11% of her kids get F's. On this one, this is for 6th grade English teachers. One teacher's giving 46% A's, the other one's giving 28% A's. On the low end, one teacher's giving only 2% F's, and the other one's giving 20% F's, and that is not equitable. And this research for these 2 tables was done at the same school. All these teachers had similar students. The students had similar standardized test scores. The instruction was similar. The assessments were similar. These teachers worked together as a team, even to score the assessments. And yet they had such a range in the grades. So what varied? The research that the administrator did at the school showed that one teacher didn't accept homework after the bell. Some teachers gave late penalties from 2 points to 2 letter grades. One teacher took off points for no heading. The other teacher took off points if the paper had ripped edges or holes. Some used weightings, but those varied from teacher to teacher, and some teachers didn't use weighting, but adjusted points based on size of assignment. And this is where those differences in grades happened. The other point from Joe Feldman's book is that grades provide unclear and often misleading information to key stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders? They're students and parents and administrators and our State Department. Grades should show academic proficiency, but oftentimes, based on different teachers' grading practices, they also could include soft skills, behaviors, attendance, participation, and effort. One example of this, in our 3rd quarter COVID-19 remote schooling, I had this set of twins in my class who I'd had the year before as well, so I know them well. And these 2 twins, one did all the formative work that I had been posting for them to do. The other didn't submit any of the formative work. For our final 3rd quarter summative assignment, they both turned it in, and they both did fairly well. I know they weren't plagiarized sister to sister, they were very different. But should one twin, the one who did all the formative assessments, should she have gotten a higher grade? Because I could have included all that formative practice and the compliance of doing that work, or should they have had the same grade that they did this final summative very similarly? The thing that really got me to think about grading, my grading practices, was a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. I had a student who, his skills were lower than I'd really ever seen. Came in as a 9th grader, super low, and he had a one-on-one aid. He was in our special ed program. He had really good support at home. He wanted to do well, so he turned everything in. And at that time, I was of the mindset to give points for everything. Everything we do should get points and be in my grade book. So I gave him points for everything that he did. And his summative, he had support. Those always came in typed and done well. So he was getting a lot of help outside of class. So in the end, at the end of my semester, he had a B. And then the special ed teacher, one of the stakeholders, came to me and said, I really think next year we need to get him into the special needs program. He's so low, he's not gonna be able to do 10th grade English. And my grade, my English B, didn't help her case in getting him the support he needed, even though we both knew that he needed more support. So the other thing to look at is the bias that we bring into the classroom, racial and class and gender biases, and that does have an impact on students and it does affect their grades. And what we have to do is build an awareness of what those can be. When I first started teaching, I'm from California, and I started teaching in the Salinas Valley. They call it the salad capital of the world. It's where a lot of lettuce comes from. And my first school was 96% Hispanic. And many of my kids were kids of migrant farm workers. So they went home and took care of their siblings. They made dinner. They got up early in the morning to make breakfast, pack lunches. These kids were taking care of, my 7th and 8th graders at the time were taking care of their siblings because their parents worked sun up to sundown in the fields. So if I did I realized very quickly that I had this bias that, you know, I'm supposed to give homework. They all need to do homework, but my kids couldn't do homework because they didn't have time. And I had to shift that thinking and take that bias out. Not everyone has the same opportunities at home to do the work. The other thing I learned at some point in my career, I couldn't tell you when, is that I had a gender bias in my classroom. I called on girls more than boys. And even when it came down to grading some pieces of work that they gave me, if it was a girl and I looked at them like, oh, she's so good in class, I'm just gonna bump that grade up a little bit. And if it was a boy that's sort of a troublemaker and hardly turned things in, I would not give him any push or bonus to his grade. And that was a bias that affected the way these kids were graded. And I had to become aware of that and then really pay attention to changing my practice there. And the final part, that grades are based on mathematically unsound calculations. I personally never really thought about this before till I read this book by Joe Feldman, the Grading for Equity book. On this 100-point scale that we're all used to because we were raised that way too, it doesn't work out right. If your kids come in and they get grades in the first quarter and they have an F, and they work really hard in that second quarter and they get an A, by the middle, they'd all just only can average out to the best a C. That kid who grew so much to an A in your class can only get a C. So that is a problem. And the other thing that is a problem mathematically, when you think about it, for those kids who get that don't turn something in, that 0 at my school, passing is a 70. So that's 70% that they don't get. But from a D to a C is another 10%. And the C to a B is another 10%. It's only 10% gap between every grade except for a D to an F. This I really started thinking about this when I read this, and I was looking at an English learner in my classroom who was from another country. She'd come in the year before, and she came into 9th grade English, not speaking, not writing, being really resistant, and we didn't know what her skills were because she wouldn't do anything. So I worked with our English language teacher, and she worked with that student, an aide worked with that student, I worked with that student. By the end of the first quarter, again, she turned nothing in, so she really had a 0 on her summatives from first quarter. But over the course of the next quarters, when she started to blossom, and she did so well, she grew just leaps and bounds, and it was really amazing. But if she had an F from first quarter, if I'd put that summative 0 in as that she didn't turn it in, and then her second quarter, she actually was beginning to meet proficiency, perhaps at a C level, she would have only had a D, if that, instead of a grade that actually recognized her tremendous growth that she did over the course of that semester. So where are we going? Where can we go from here? For me, I'm beginning to work on how I can de-emphasize grades. The formative, I started by just really minimizing the point value of formative, and now I've shifted to not even scoring formative at all, to question grading and do your research, do action research, try things in your class, in your grade book, and learn from the experts. And at some point when you're ready and you're comfortable, to start to talk to others about it. It's a really hard conversation to talk to people about their grading. I don't know if you've seen that at your school, but my teachers their identity is really caught up in their beliefs about grading and grading practices. But that's also what makes it unfair to kids, because they're so different from teacher to teacher. So my philosophy, as I'm looking more and more at grading, is very connected to this one. It's from this book called The End of Average, and I'm reading about the history of averaging and where that came from. And if you read about the history of averaging, you'll realize that the average, or C's or B's or A's, and the ranking of people, it's actually not real. Get the book. Highly recommend this one too. But he says that the task is developing them, not ranking and sorting them, to help our children become the best version of themselves. And that's my goal, is how do I help each individual kid, the kids that I have right now, become the best version of themselves. And I don't want grading to be something that is a penalty or something that is discouraging them from their growth. So my philosophy at this point, and where I'm going with this, is I want to be the teacher as the guide, not the judge and jury. So I'm working on learning versus points, competence versus compliance, and growth versus grades. And in each of these are things I'm trying out. And again, it's just trying to figure out what works best. I'm conferencing with students as often as I can, even right at the beginning of the year, to learn about them and to learn about their growth. I'm focusing on giving feedback in the moment and not points on formative. I'm collecting evidence of learning in the grade book instead of points. So I'll post an assignment in the grade book, but I'll just put a comment with feedback of what they've done well and maybe a next step, versus points or a rubric. And that's just on the formative work right now. Competence versus compliance, I'm not giving any type of grade penalty, like taking points off for late work. I tried out ditching the 0 this particular school year and started to enter a 50% with a comment that says needs to submit. And what I found was I had a kid who was failing at that point, and I went back, changed the summa to 50%, put needs to submit, and I let all the kids know that I was doing that. And all of a sudden this kid turned in his summative assignment because he thought he had a chance, instead of so far away at that 0 score. And I'm actually grading for summative work only, not the formative. And one thing I want to tell you about competence versus compliance, this is a picture of my son when he was in middle school, and his 8th grade science teacher sent him home with an F+, which I'd never heard of an F+ at that point. So I had a conference with the teacher, and she showed me her grade book where he had passed all of the tests, barely, but he passed. But he wasn't compliant. He didn't do the daily journal practice that she wanted her little scientist to do. So she gave him an F+. Yeah. She believed that's what they should do. They should write things down every day. This is a kid who didn't process things well with writing because it's so complex. If she'd had him just record his thoughts about what he was learning every day, he totally could have done it. But he got an F+ because he wasn't compliant with what she thought he should do. So growth versus grades, this is the thing I'm really trying to shift to as well. I'm working on having students set expectations for the growth. So when we are doing new learning with standard, I'll put the standard, some criteria, and have them say where they are now and predict where they think they will get by the end of the unit. And Hattie's research claims that having these kids kind of look ahead at predicting their grades can actually help them get 3 years of growth in a year. He gives it a 1.44 effect size. And having students reflect on their learning, metacognition also has a high effect size. It's where kids transfer their learning when they reflect on in writing or recording or talking about what they've learned. It's actually helping get it into their long-term memory. And collaborating with students, and this is new for me now, I was just starting to do it before COVID-19 happened, but to collaborate with kids, to work together with them to determine a grade for grade checks and final grades. And I think I'm gonna try that next year instead of the points and the percentages that add up to what you are as a whole. So my bottom line is that you have to trust yourself and your ideas. You don't have to go with my ideas. Do your research in class and on your own, and trust yourself and your students. I'm working on collaborating with my students to determine final grades that celebrate their progress and growth and focus on learning, not the grades. At this point, just quick, you can see the books that I referenced. They're in a resource link that Morgan is going to provide for where we're going now. What I want you to do is just take a minute or two to think about what changed, challenged, or confirmed your thinking and what I presented. Changed, Challenged, and Confirmed is a reading reflection prompt by Beers and Probst. It's a really good one. What changed your thoughts, challenged your thoughts, or confirmed something you were already thinking? So I'm going to ask you to think of something that you'd be willing to share with the group to that prompt. So take a few minutes, and when you're ready, pop your video back on so we can see you're ready, and then we'll start a discussion. Thanks.
Excuse me. If you have the participant box open, you'll see in the bottom right hand corner a little box that says raise hand. And that gives us a way to call on you.
I'm going to call on everybody, Morgan.
You're just going to go call on everybody?
I am. I really would love everyone to find one thing they can share, whether it's something you're questioning or something that this made you think of. I think it's really important to be a part of the discussion.
Excellent. All right, then. I'm going to sit right back and let you go.
So we're going to kind of just, as people are still thinking and coming back in, what I'm going to do is something that I do in class is I give kids a prompt and I give them wait time to think about it and process it. And then, and I let them know we're going to just wrap around the room and everybody's going to share that thing that they came up with. So I'm basically going to wrap around this room and be ready. You're welcome to pass, but please consider sharing. So about 30 more seconds. I have to look at my timer because I'm not an accurate predictor of time. I don't know if any of us are accurate predictors of time. So before we do that, just really quickly, I see that Beth posted a question about what did I say to my admin to get them on board with this. I said, look at this book I'm reading. It's so good. And then I told him a little bit about it, and then he bought it for himself. And then he bought it for our whole leadership team. So even if I can send you, I can send a PDF of the introductory chapter that has those tables. Even that piece is something that an administrator could read, and I think it would start to change their thinking. Okay, are we ready for some sharing? All right, I'm just gonna use this to stay organized about who I'm just gonna go down the list. So Beth, I'm gonna unmute you and ask if you'd be willing to share. Or you unmute yourself because that didn't work. Oh, there it goes.
Nope, there. I had a thing popped up. I think one of the things that this confirmed is what I feel in my gut. And you mentioned things that really, like the minute you said it, I was like, yes. The challenge is that the system I don't feel like the system supports some of those choices, and figuring out how to do this in a way that I can feel good about, that my admin will support. I am going to join the tech study group because honestly, there were so many things that I was jotting down that felt right in my gut. And I don't want to rank and sort kids, but ultimately that's what I do.
Yeah, this one for English teachers, really thinking about how do we work within our current systems is helpful with that.
Okay.
And is for English particularly. Okay, how about Christine? Thank you, Beth.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have so many comments and ideas and questions about this. I'll try to just keep it to one or two. I've been interested in this subject for really long. Well, I've only been a teacher for 15 years, and when you're as old as I am, only 15 years is a very short period of time. But I totally think everything that you said is absolutely true. I mean, this is the way we need to go. And I know that this has been a discussion in academia for a number of years. Our school district has been using the 4-point standard-based grading system, but no one has liked it. Parents don't like it. Parents don't like.
Or don't apologize. Just keep talking.
Parents don't like it. The students don't like it. When it was rolled out, I don't think it was done clearly enough so that, can you hear me over that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think the problem was a lot of people did not understand what that was. Come here, come. Oh, sorry, she was so quiet before.
She'll get quiet again.
She will. No, I don't know if she will not. But anyway, so the they didn't understand it. They didn't like it. So I was on the leadership team this year because of my interest in grading and the standards. I like this. I want to stay in a 4-point. I think it needs to be done in a way that everyone understands exactly how it's supposed to work. And I think that was unclear. So I presented to this school some documents they could read, and we were going to talk about it. But around the time we were supposed to talk about it, the high school had decided, no, they're dumping the 4-point standard based, and they're going purely to grading, 10-point ABCDF grading system. So then there was a discussion about whether or not we wanted to do that here as well in the middle school. And what you said about teachers' identities are so caught up in this, that was exactly what happened. They understand this, they like this, they're comfortable about this. I'm so sorry that it must be so annoying to be listening to. Hang on. Anyway,
Okay.
so
we'll come back to you if the dog stops barking, if you're okay with that. Then you can get your thoughts back together.
Let me go see what's going on.
Okay. How about Emily? Is there an Emily in the house?
Yeah, that's probably me. So I wanted to just confirm some thinking. I felt like I really related to the part where you could have multiple teachers teaching the same subject, but then students come out with different grades. So that impacts everyone. It impacts the students who need extra support, but it also impacts the students at the top who are maybe competing to be in the top 10% of their class. So I thought that was interesting that grading can look unfair even in high performing scenarios as well. And I saw once online that there's a teacher who has a little like comment box at the bottom of all of her grammar quizzes. And if a student fails, instead of writing an F or writing the number grade, she just writes in the comment box, student has not learned this grammar skill, and student is to come for an extra help session on these 3 days. Like, please check the box and give this paper back to me, and like, I look forward to seeing you. So I thought that was a really interesting idea. I like grading written work with rubrics because I feel as if rubrics are somewhat more equitable. I don't like grading traditional tests or quizzes because then you're really stuck on this 100-point scale.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. How about Gail?
Yes, hello. I teach sixth grade, and the thing that really stood out to me was when you talked about conferencing with kids and talking with them about their grades or about the piece of writing that they've done or whatever. And it's interesting because I found that over the past few weeks, I've had way more time to conference the students, even though it's not in person. It's back and forth via emails or on the sides of their writing pieces or whatever they're working on. So I just kind of feel like that's kind of a good thing that's happened. It's made me aware that the conferences don't always have to be face to face with the kids, but I always felt like I needed to do when I was in the classroom with them. And of course, we have way more time right now to do that, but it seems like kids have so much to share, and now their opportunity to do that. Maybe not person or from the whole group, but just individually with me. So I kind of see that as a real plus. The other thing is that we've gone through a bit of grades for this last phase. We've gone to either turned in or incomplete in Infinite Campus. And it's kind of interesting because for some of those, I'm going to say about 40 or 50% of the kids, seeing that incomplete is far more, they see that as something far worse than seeing a failing grade there. They don't want the incompletes there. So I feel like some of them are really working hard to get something in, and then it's turned in. So I kind of see some pluses and some positive things here. Thank you.
How about Jason?
I think when I was listening to, oops, oh, you unmuted me already. All right.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, good. Okay. I think what I would say is that I agree with it. I mean, I think that we also have a 4-point scale, the 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4. And I really try not to penalize kids. I made an extra effort this year to, rather than, I would just leave missings. And we were supposed to be changing missings to 1s and things like that, which really damages the kids' grades. And I don't do it even though I'm supposed to. So this year I made an extra effort to get into, just to make sure that I was getting a very, very high percentage of work turned in, so that therefore I didn't have to turn, those missings to 1s. But one thing I find, and again, I work with great people that are passionate and care about their students and care about their practice. But one thing I do find is that people like to, I don't want to, it's hard for me to say people like to penalize kids, but I think there are some people out there that, yeah, they just like for them putting a 1 in there. For me, I don't put 1s in there, but putting a 1 in there for them there's almost something satisfactory about it, and I think that you're never really going to get 100% equity unless you have some sort of, if you have an electronic thing scoring things, then yeah, you'd probably have one. They try that. I mean, they try to get us, we're all using the same rubric, we're all using the same scoring guides and everything. And even still, I guarantee you, I don't know if it would be as widespread as that statistic you showed in your presentation, but I guarantee you there would be differences with certain kids. And some kids there wouldn't, because some kids are going to excel no matter where they are, but some kids need that extra guidance. So no, I agree with this, and it's something I try to put into practice all the time, so hopefully there'll be an answer. But through COVID, we switched to the no harm policy. And so now I'm told to leave missings that don't penalize. That's what I do anyways, and I'm hoping beyond hope that in the future they'll go to that, and that all of that will, kids are out of school for 2 months because they have some sort of emotional issue that's going on, and you can't how can you penalize them for that? Yeah, I just don't understand. But anyways, sorry, I'm rambling, but thank you.
Thanks. How about John? John, calling John, going once.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
All right.
I didn't know if you were going to unmute me or
I
not.
tried. It wasn't clicking.
A lot of people to handle. First of all, thank you so much for doing this today. You give me a lot to think about, and I think for a lot of us, we've already been thinking about a lot of it. And thank you for all the book of recommendations too. So one thing we all need, right, is more books. I think what I was thinking about through a lot of this presentation were, I guess you could call them the powers that be. This whole conversation, you were mentioning how you showed your administrator that book, and how basically it takes some convincing of people above you. Not to mention having everybody in the building on board. Because in my mind, if you're going to be talking about, the elephant as you expressed it, everyone has to be on the same page. And I mean, the difficulty in making that happen, building wide, I teach in a high school English. And even among probably the dozen people or so that would have to be on board, you can see different styles of the way people teach, and certainly in the way that they grade. So right there, by definition, there's no equity. So I think the challenge right now, is probably addressing that elephant and convincing the powers that be. One of the other things that I think about too, that I've thought about a lot in terms of how we would like to grade versus how we're asked to grade. One of the things I've always thought is that a student should be able to speak to his or her strengths in terms of, how can I show you that I know how to do that and that I've learned such and such, whether they're visual or audio or however they do their best learning. So have them be able to express it that way as much as possible versus what they say you have to do. Well, that's okay, but you need to make sure they do it these other ways too. When the reality is that the more they use those other ways, it's probably going to damage their grade as we're grading now. So is that fair to the student? I had a student come into transfer into my class fairly early in the third quarter, which as it turns out was our last real quarter this year. Did very poorly at her previous school, did much better at our school. And I really had to struggle with how to grade her because she made such progress. And so I guess what I finally decided to do after I thought of various scenarios was to take the grade, because they always give you, this was her grade in the third quarter at her previous school. Okay, well that maybe was only 20% of the quarter. So I really tried to make what I did represent more of what she could do. Because I think just doing the 0-100 thing and congratulations, you get a 50 is ridiculous, because it doesn't show where the student is now. And I totally agree that you shouldn't penalize students for, the Fs they got in September if they're getting As in April, because obviously they know it now. So why am I penalizing you for not having known it then? One of the other things that kind of caught my ear as you were going through this was the metacognition. I actually did a lot of study of metacognition when I was in my grad school degree, and I have yet to put as much as I want to into practice in I imagine all these scenarios in my head about how I'm going to have the students engage in metacognition. And then either something practical gets in the way, or it turns out we don't have enough time to do such and such, because we're always fighting that. And I guess I'm just wondering if there are any specific resources that you would recommend for how to engage students in that thinking about their thinking.
I'll have to think about that, but I
Okay.
add them to the list. I know that I took Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher's list of reflective questions about being reader and writer, and I made that my midterm and final. Like I pulled a bunch of questions, gave kids options, and so they, instead of being tested at the end of the semester, they wrote a reflection.
Right.
But yeah, I'll think if I have some sources for that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. How about Kim Barnes?
Hey, Patty, thank you so much. It reaffirms everything that I think everybody thinks all the time about grading. The word compliance just always sticks out to me, right? Because grading, in my experience as a student, was about compliance. You did this, you did this, you did this. But the aha that keeps coming back to me with grading is how much of a growth mindset you need to have as a teacher to instill that into your students. And this year I was very cognizant of, when I started writing with kids, just giving them feedback and retraining them. No, you don't have to have a grade on this. Take my feedback and make things better. Look for improvement. Nope, we're not grading. And they got very comfortable, and they were much more apt to take risks with vocabulary or sentence structure because they knew it was a safer environment. So I just shout out, yes, you know what I mean? It's okay to try new things, and it's okay for us as teachers to have a growth mindset. And I think it's important to spread that growth mindset to our kids, but also to our peers, because I think as colleagues, sometimes there are disciplines that are more, at least in my experience in my building, that have much more of a fixed mindset because they track kids. These are the kids who are always going to get A's because they always, they're in the upper track. They can do the higher level skills, and I'm always fighting them. Any kid can make growth at any time. And so I think that it's kind of two-pronged. Yes, they have to change how they talk about grading, but they also have to change their own mindset a little bit. So that was kind of what I had to say.
Thank you. How about Kristen?
Hi, Patty. Thank you.
Yeah.
My school is having this conversation right now. So my question to you is, if there are some teachers who see and understand the inequities in grading, and also administrators who do, and everyone's starting to their eyes are opening to this, and more conversation is being had. Your school, it seems like, is like almost a step ahead, where you've had these conversations with your administrators based on the text. I guess my question is, what are the next steps for teachers and teacher and admin teams working together to implement some of these mindset changes in the classroom, in the schools, and change some of the practices? How does that happen? How does it happen from knowing these things are, the inequities are happening, and then actually making a change, for learners and their learning?
I think a tool like this gives you that thing to talk about, that takes it away from everybody's ideologies and prior experiences. Like looking at something like those tables alone and considering what the impact is on kids. So I'm a big believer in looking at research and text as a way to start talking about it. What's happening now with COVID-19 has really pushed that, and it's actually a prime opportunity to start having these conversations because we're already being forced to. And I know that my principal, who was just beginning the process of wanting to push this out to the whole staff next year, now he sees like this glimmer of hope, like, okay, they're going to get it better now than they would have, because we're really seeing the inequities. So I don't know if I have the answers, but I think that a tool like this book, even a chapter or two from this book, is really helpful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. How about Lindsay?
Sure. I was just discussing with my colleagues one of the questions I had, and I realized it was an issue with our grading system. we do the 1 to 4 in the middle school. I take that back. I do a 1 to 4 in 6th grade. 7th and 8th grade do 1 to 4 and 0 to 100. So they have to do both of them. And so one of my questions was, how would that work in a 1 to 4 setting if you to do like the 50 type thing in a 1 to 4 setting, if like a kid, I don't know. See, I was trying to articulate my question. If a kid did half of something and turned it in, literally half of something, you might give them, based on what they've done, maybe they're at a 2. But if they don't turn it in at all, do you give them a 1 or do you give them a 2? I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, how might I do that?
In my recollection in this book, he actually highly recommends the 1 to 4 over the traditional 100% because the range is so much closer. So if you would give somebody a 1, they're not that far from the 2 or the 3.
Right.
So there may be some answers in that chapter, but I didn't pay too much attention because we don't do that.
If they're missing it, though, you still give them, because in my district, we don't have the option with our grading software to give them a missing. It's literally a no grade, which is like we've never graded it, or we haven't gotten it yet, or we haven't gotten to grading it. There's no difference between those options, or it's a 1, which for us, formatives are counted for 0% and summatives are counted for everything. So in talking to my colleague, I was kind of thinking about how a lot of those are kind of district specific to us. But I do have one. I'm sorry to talk a whole bunch. I do have one, though. What would you say to the kids that, not to game the system, I guess, but that they intentionally don't put forth the effort the first time because they know they can do it again? Now, I kind of thought about whether or not I wanted to say that one because I didn't know if that was kind of going off on a tangent as far as equitable grading goes, but I am kind of thinking about it.
When I've had a student who gave me a piece of work at a low quality to game the system and get me to give her all the answers, by my grade, like what would need to be done so she could resubmit it, I actually didn't give a grade and I gave it back and asked her to do it again, or to add to it. So I did not give it that score so that she could game the system to get the higher score. I just gave feedback and asked her to do it again.
I think that's what Kim was describing, right? Like where she'd give people feedback without the score, so they don't have the score entered in there.
But
it'll change.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I mean, like I said, then us not having anything in there is kind of like specific to our district, that there's no value for I haven't turned it in yet. There's nothing we can put in there. The parents who would check it, or kids who would check it, wouldn't, I mean, the kids should know what they've turned in and haven't, but parents wouldn't know the difference between, well, Miss Peterson hasn't graded this yet and she's getting on it, or the kid hasn't turned it in at all, so.
And there's not a place for a comment that you could.
It is, but I'm finding that the programs that we use is not the most user-friendly in that respect. And most parents don't know how to access that.
I'm going to jump in here for a minute just because of time. I know there were some people who said they had to leave it too. I hope that in this, so I put a couple of things in the chat box. One is the feedback for today's session and where you get your contact hours. The other is the registration for the text study of the book that Patty's been referencing. Now, I put in a request for funding to buy 50 books, and the way that works is that if I get it, I can give you a code, and you send to the company with that code. That code is a discount for the full price, and they'll send it directly to you. I'd hope to know that response by today, but that's not there. But anyway, so my suggestion is if you're interested, sign up for the professional text study, and I will let you know by Monday whether I can buy those books for you and get them to you. Part of what I hope happens during this text study is that we go deeper into this issue that Lindsay has brought up. I find that grading discussions often, there's pedagogy, which Patty has been talking about extensively, and then there's technology, the gradebook options that we choose, and what we have to record. There's all kinds of things that are not about pedagogy at all. And I find oftentimes grades are determined by the product that you purchase as opposed to the years of pedagogical study that you bring to your experience. And this comes back to Jason saying, I'm supposed to do this, but I'm not going to. It's where his pedagogy and his technology were at odds. So I hope to dig much more deeply into that. I think in this environment, we're more able to have that discussion because administrators have embraced the pass, fail, pass, incomplete. Like they're worried about how to do grading going forward. Now's the time for us, as Patty said, grab some good resources, develop our own stance, if you will, and be able to support that. So that's what I hope to accomplish. So I wanted to throw that out there. I'm absolutely willing to stay on and continue the conversation with anybody who wants to keep it going. Patty, can you hang out longer too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
We don't have kids on Wednesday.
to hang in, let's keep talking.
Okay. Well, if you're still there, Renee, or did Renee just drop out? I think she might have just left.
Yeah,
How about,
it's one of those people with another engagement.
Yep. How about Lori? Is Lori still there?
I am, and I actually came in late. I didn't get in till almost 1:30, so I kind of missed everything other than what other people have been sharing. So I've picked up a little, maybe I'm going off the wrong way, but for me, and I think most of us in here, grading is less about like a I got ya sort of mentality. And the hardest part is teaching our peers that same sort of mentality. The grading is not about what didn't you pass in or how wrong are you. It's more about growth. And I don't know, that's just been my mentality for quite a long time. The tricky part is getting other people to see it that way as well. Whether you're on a 1 to 4 scale or a 100-point scale, you know, giving a kid a 0 says the kid did nothing or knows nothing. And what's the point of that? It's not our job. So, I mean, that's kind of what I've picked up in some of what you are all saying. And maybe I'm way off base because I missed the point, but grading is something that our district has put a lot of time and effort into, and still it comes back to some people have that mentality of how wrong is this kid, and so I don't know what the answer is to that.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
How about May?
Hi. I was also a little bit late getting in, so I kind of saw like the tail end of what you were talking about. I have the luxury of teaching English at the middle school level instead of the high school level, so I do feel a little more flexibility to, you know, not put grades on things and hand back feedback, or, you know, I have my kids in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so standards that they maybe don't meet in 6th grade, I can still like continue to work with them over the course of the next 2 years of their education, which is really helpful, but I think the equity in, you know, grading across the board is really a conversation we need to be able to have district-wide, you know, not just classroom-wise. And I think we're, as a person who does teach some high school classes, but in history, I think we're still looking at a lot of traditional structures in our high schools in terms of GPA, in terms of credits. So even though my school has gone to the 4-point scale, you know, we have since decided to add like pluses and minuses. So we have like, instead of having a 1, 2, 3, 4, we have like a DNM minus and a DNM and a DNM plus and a P minus and a P and a P plus. So I think grading has just become such a messy thing. And we, you know, right now looking at COVID-19 and the impact on kids' grades that a lot of this distance learning is having, I think it's getting us closer to a place where we can have these kinds of conversations. But I can't even imagine how you would do it in a larger district. I mean, I'm on Vinyl Haven and we have really, you know, small classes, and, you know, our senior class is 10 kids, you know. So yeah, I don't know how to get everybody together on these sorts of questions.
Restart.
Are you saying something, Morgan? Or
I'm just saying we start here. This is how we create the grassroots movement that hopefully gets us there.
And I think it's important too that, you know, like right now, things that Morgan's doing at the state and the conversations they're also having at the state level, that they're also having with our administrators, that so the conversations are happening. It's really a beginning because of this. Thank you. How about Margaret?
Oh, I came in late as well. I don't have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Enjoying listening. And well, actually, I'm going to ask: is the recording accessible? The first part of it that I missed. Can we watch that?
Yes.
Yeah, I will. It'll download. It takes about an hour after the end, and then I upload it to YouTube. So hopefully tomorrow or Friday, I'll have it posted. Do you all know where to go and find the recordings of all the sessions? All right, then you know what? I'm gonna put that link in there for you right now, so you'll know where everything is housed.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
That was a good question. It was important. How about Neil?
Sure. Thank you for having this session. I've gotten to do proficiency based, so just saying, are they meeting the standard, not, and literally given free reign just to grade it however I want to. At a small school, I did a mixed thing, and now I'm just doing the traditional grading. For intrinsic motivations, I have just believed that it has less to do with the grading system you have to use and much more about the assignments you choose to create. So if the assignments are intrinsically motivated, I think that has much more to do with if the students are going to feel that than if I grade it in a special way. And then just making connections with kids. One thing I notice is when people say that 1 through 4 proficiency is a better grading system, what I also notice is they always say, oh, it means more one-on-one meetings. It means more differentiating for what the kid needs. So I feel like whatever system you're using, connecting with your student, providing more one-on-one time, and making assignments that allow them to really share their opinions and experiences is what is the most important part. So regardless of whatever the regime is at your school, you can still be effective.
Excellent point. Thank you. Shannon.
Yes. Thank you, Patty. I want to say I can confirm. One of the first things I usually say to my students is, I wish I could just give you a grade in June. We have work to do, we have learning to happen, and the worst part of my day is when I have to sit down and assign a numerical grade to what's happening in my classroom. So students are really comfortable with me because I kind of break down that barrier that their grade is theirs. And, if everyone, earns whatever they want to earn in my class, it's less to do with me. So I love the idea of the guide, not the judge and jury, as a teacher. I don't spend a lot of time, lecturing. It's more like hands-on and learning and conferencing with students. But we're all over the place with grading. We've gone with the PBE stuff, and then we kind of backtracked on that. And then, I have current AP language students in junior year, and they've suffered so much from this grading, and changing our minds on how we're doing it, so right now we have some people taking points off for late work, people giving zeros, some people giving 50s, some people, there's just no equity anywhere. If you decide to retake a test, you can get 20 points back. Doesn't really matter if you get a 100, you can earn back 20 points because you had to do it again. I can't say how much I appreciate this line of thinking. I always approach grading as how would I want someone to be treating my children when they're learning, and where, yeah.
Behave.
So that's what I think, I just think if we are in that time of do no harm and this learning experience, what have we been doing all along? I just, and I really do think it's a process. It's not on April 13th, you knew this much and this is your grade and it has to stay there permanently, it's just one of those things that I really dread in my work completely.
I hear ya. Terry, you have been the most patient. You were the last one at the bottom of the list.
No problem. Somebody's got to be last, right?
Yeah.
So listening to all of these conversations, and I'm so on board. And in the theory of this conversation, I'm right there. But teaching teenagers, I find that the challenge comes when we try to put some of these things into practice. So you don't grade formatives and you don't penalize for late work. Well, guess what that means some of your students are going to do? They're absolutely going to wait until the last minute to turn something in. And that's fine if it's first quarter and they can redo it for second quarter, but it just, there's a certain percentage of the student body in every school I've ever taught with that, to quote a colleague, knows how to game the system, and they do it. And I've yet to find a way to prevent that from happening. So I'm wide open for suggestions for that small segment of the class that knows I don't have to do anything until the last summative, and then I can wait and turn it in at the very end or even late because there's no penalty for it. So that's my challenge.
I hear you. I feel that sometimes too, but also for some of them, they're not really gaming the system. They're struggling. And so, it's providing an opportunity for those kids to actually demonstrate that they are learning something. So for me, it's worth it to make that shift and to have, a couple of kids that get away with gaming the system to make it more equitable for all of them. And I also try, coming back, I think, to what Neil says about the assignments that you create, and
right.
On top of that, the opportunities for them to do it. So they're doing it in class. Like I have general ed English classes. I don't have honors or AP classes, but I make the space and time in class, and I also get around and work with kids. So that kid that's still fooling around and not getting it done, I'm sitting down next to that kid or something like that. So I'm always trying to be on top of knowing what they're doing, where they are, and their progress. So I think it's knowing our kids is the most important thing, and knowing where they are and what they're capable of and what their growth is huge. That will become the dilemma in the fall when we don't know what school's going to look like, because getting to know our kid, like I feel fortunate that we had almost 3 quarters, at least half a year with our kids to get to know them before the remote learning. And what if we go into the fall with remote learning, or only some of the kids there part of the time, or so that'll be a little tougher. But knowledge of kids is huge. Anybody want to pop in with other comments or questions that popped up, or we're feeling spent? Yeah, Shannon.
Yeah, so Terry, I was curious about like that zone of relevancy. We did a lot of work with that. So I hear you on the gonna wait to the absolute last minute. And you know, we have a policy in our district, like, so 2 weeks beyond a quarter, that's when the incomplete, so you put that incomplete in and then you do that work there. But as I went through, like, I really think remediation sooner than later is the best way to go. So as I'm going through material and trying to you know, keep kids with me in the flow, even though they're still working, you know, at their own pace, but the class also has that pace, and that's kind of that tension in the classroom sometimes, is when students realizing, oh, that zone of relevancy. So if I have this and I still can't get that done, it's not about moving on, but it's about giving them like some designated time to catch up. Because I hear all the time, like, you know, some teachers are saying, oh, they're trying to go back to quarter 2, or they're trying to go back. And that's why I say I wish I didn't have to give any grades until June, so that we could just always keep working. And it's really sad that what we use for a tool to communicate grades is what's dictating how we give those grades sometimes. And I don't know if that helps, but it's just kind of reframing my thinking on it too.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I do think students would be better served if we could just continue to work with them throughout the year and then assess them at the end of the year, because then we are looking at their growth. But good luck convincing any school district of that.
I was standing there in a conversation with our vice principal and a math teacher, and the math teacher was complaining about having to put grades in the first quarter, because it's such a developmental time, right? And we're teaching them at that time, and they're all coming from different schools and different places to us. And so first quarter is like, that's really formative, almost the entire quarter. And the vice principal said, why do you have to put a grade in? And the math teacher said, because we have to. She's like, do you? No, don't we? Like, we think there's this expectation that we have to put these grades in, but is there? Because we had an administrator questioning that. So it is about shifting a mindset, and it starts with each one of us. May?
Sorry, I didn't realize before that I wasn't muted. I've got my.
Oh, that's okay. We didn't hear much of what you said.
Oh, great. Awesome. My son's on a Zoom call with a teacher, so I'm trying to like make sure he's doing what he's supposed to be doing while I'm, you know, here doing this. But something that really kind of resonated with me is just the idea of that like relationship with the student being the foundation of everything else that you're like working with them on. I have found myself, like, even with big assignments, like long papers that we're doing, obviously at the middle school level, like over several weeks, finding ways of either, you know, keeping kids, I'll have like a lunch date with a student if, you know, I notice that they're not progressing kind of, or they're kind of dallying and thinking like, oh, I can just totally, a super concerned lunch date, like, we are going to sit down and we are going to make sure that, like, you know exactly what we're doing. Like, even though it's a bit sickly sweet and, you know, sometimes, you know, they try to wiggle out of it a little bit, just that like kids notice when you point out that like you're seeing that they're not moving, like, and that sometimes is just enough to push them into starting to engage in that process with you. So I found that that's something that I definitely have to kind of continuously check, because they will kind of sneak off into the corner and do nothing if they think that our eyes are not on them. But
yeah. And something interesting I'm just starting to think about, and I think it's because Morgan brought it up to me. We were talking about doing this book study, and she said, and can we connect it to the revised state standards? And I'm like, I don't really see how you do that. It doesn't make sense to me. And I haven't seen her notes yet, so she hasn't told me. But I was thinking, like, we always have these summative written assignments that we do. And, we've got the informational text, and we've got the narrative and the literary analysis. We've got these different pieces, and they're all summative, and they're different types of writing. But the revised state standards have now shifted writing to inquiry, right? Morgan, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have it memorized, but no longer there's a different standard for these different writing types. So if we can do 3 or 4 different inquiries over the course of the semester with different writings, I only need one sample from a kid that actually can show me that they can do this well. I don't necessarily need all 4 of those turned in. It's great if they are, because that's practice and that's how we get better. But I could assess a kid on 1. Because
it shifts the focus to away from the task and to the learning, and that's why I'm excited about bringing in the standards. The way that the standards were revised, they were kind of pulled up. Anything that seemed to indicate really specific curriculum, that was shaved off. Like, we're going to take that out, because we want to focus on the learning. And we want to put the decisions about what and how to teach firmly in the hands of the teachers. And so what Patty's referencing is that the writing standards, of course, have been pared down to 3 writing standards. They're inquiry, they're having a process for collaboration and development, and they're about making sure that you are paying attention to audience and purpose and craft, your form and format. The way that you write for science is different than you would write a literary analysis. So those 3 ideas that are the writing standards could actually be applied to everything. That's my argument.
I see that shifting the way I grade in the fall as well. Yeah. Interesting.
So we've already had quite a few people sign up to do the text study, which is awesome. Let's keep my fingers crossed. I think that I got through all the first hurdles for getting the financing. It's just waiting to get the signatures at the end. But this is the approach that I'm thinking would make sure that we keep coming back to where we've been and where we're going, that this is a different way of creating the map. So yes, sorry, Patty, I have not yet shared those notes with you, but I will get them to you.
I know. Any other thoughts or questions before we close this out? It looks like have a nice day. I wish it would stop being windy.
Oh my goodness.
How it is where everyone else is, but.
Terrible. Howling all day long.
Is it always like this in April, May with the wind?
No.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I'm not used to that.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Don't forget to do your feedback forms.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Great job, Patty. Thank you so much.